Welcome back to the deep dive. In our last deep dive, we followed the DuBose family's first generation born in Carolina, Isaac's children. We saw them move past just, well, surviving, didn't we?
We did. They started building real wealth, getting significant land holdings, and, really integrating themselves into that colonial society as respected citizens.
Right.
They laid the groundwork.
Right. They built that foundation.
And today, we're going to see that foundation basically catch fire. We're shifting gears, moving right into the American Revolution, focusing entirely on the third generation.
Okay.
These are the descendants who inherited more than just plantations. They inherited a massive crisis. They were faced with this huge choice, pledged their wealth, maybe even their lives, to forge a completely new nation.
Okay, so this is a major turning point. Let's unpack this and maybe introduce who we're focusing on for this deep dive.
Our central figure today is Samuel DuBose, Sr. Now, he was born around 1747, and he was just fundamentally different from his grandfather, Isaac. Well, Isaac was a refugee, fleeing persecution. Samuel, on the other hand, was born into, well, prosperity, comfort, stability. He was what you'd call a gentleman planter, established within the colonial system.
But he comes of age right when that system is starting to crack.
Precisely. His stable world gets completely shattered by all the political upheaval with Great Britain, and he didn't just sit back and watch. He jumped in, committed himself completely, eventually rising to captain in the fight for independence.
And that decision, his service, it really elevates this family story, doesn't it? It's more than just local history now.
Oh, absolutely. It's the critical pivot point. His service marks this profound shift for the DuBoses. They go from being, a Huguenot refugee family looking for safety or even just successful British colonists
Right.
to becoming truly American founders. Their family story gets permanently woven into the fabric of the United States itself.
It's a huge transformation. So to really grasp the risks he took, we need to understand who Samuel was before all this started. Where did he stand in South Carolina society?
Okay, so genealogically, he's the son of Daniel DuBose and Anne Rembert. That makes him Isaac's direct grandson.
Got it.
Born 1747, so he's third-generation Carolinian, fully native to the colony. But I think what's really key here is his social standing. By the 1760s, the 1770s, the DuBoses weren't just getting by. They were part of the local elite.
So a world away from Isaac's arrival in the 1690s, much more secure, established.
Entirely different. The sources are clear. The DuBoses were established, they were wealthy, and crucially, they were slave-owning planters. They were concentrated in St. Stephen's Parish.
And St. Stephen's Parish, that's near the Santee River, right? Puts them squarely in the Low Country.
Exactly. The heart of South Carolina's plantation economy. They are politically connected, economically successful within that colonial framework. I mean, they were the kind of people the colony was essentially built to benefit.
And being in the Low Country, that location is so significant. Their wealth wasn't just from farming. It was tied to these massive, globally traded cash crops.
Yes, and that's really the core of their motivation, but also the source of their risk. Their focus had completely shifted from, basic survival to economic power and increasingly political autonomy.
Okay.
We're talking huge investments in crops like rice that was the bedrock of low country wealth, and also indigo.
Ah, indigo. That was huge then, wasn't it? Almost like colonial blue gold.
It really was. Thanks to British bounties supporting its production, it was a major export, used for dyeing textiles all across the British Empire.
So when you're dealing with commodities that valuable, your relationship with the crown must change. It's not just about protection anymore.
It becomes about regulation, about commerce. Planters like Samuel started feeling, hemmed in by British trade rules and taxes. These are concerns totally different from his grandfather's worries about religious freedom.
Right. These are powerful men feeling their profits, their economic freedom is being limited by London.
That's the crux of it. They felt constrained by a distant government. And Samuel wasn't just wealthy. He was actively cementing his family's position. We know he married Elizabeth Sinclair. What does a marriage like that tell us?
Good question. What did it signal?
Marrying into the Sinclair family was a major statement. It wasn't just personal. It was basically an alliance between two powerful planter families in the area.
Solidifying connections, influence.
Exactly. So when Samuel sets up his own household, he's immediately recognized as a pillar of St. Stephen's Parish society. He's got the land, the enslaved workforce, the economic clout, the family ties. He had, frankly, everything to lose: stability, wealth, status. But when those disputes with Britain really heated up, He made that calculated, incredibly risky choice to back the rebellion.
That economic risk alone is just staggering to think about, putting generations of built-up wealth right on the line. Which leads us straight into the war itself. South Carolina, as we know, wasn't united. It was deeply divided. Historians often call it a civil war there.
Oh, it absolutely was. Deeply fractured, incredibly painful for communities. The political geography was really the key. The patriot cause, the push for independence, was strongest around Charlestown and in that surrounding low country.
Where the planters like DuBose were concentrated?
Precisely. That planter class and the merchants in Charlestown, they felt they had the most to gain from free trade and, frankly, the least patience for royal governors imposing taxes and rules. They saw rebellion as protecting their economic power.
Their autonomy.
Yes, the right to manage their own considerable affairs. But then you move inland into the backcountry.
A different world.
Totally different. Settled more by subsistence farmers, newer immigrants, people with fewer ties to that coastal elite, and often fewer direct grievances with the crown. There you found a really significant loyalist population, strong loyalist sentiment.
So militias weren't just forming to fight the British Army miles away. They were forming to deal with divisions right there, neighbor against neighbor.
Exactly right. Every community, pretty much every parish, was forced to pick a side.
Right.
And that led directly to these local militias forming. They were essential because they represented a community's declared loyalty enforced by local men, local leaders.
Which brings us right back to Samuel's role, captain in the militia.
Yes.
Now that title, captain, today we think military training, maybe West Point, but in St. Stephen's Parish around 1776, what did being a militia captain really say about Samuel DuBose?
It says an enormous amount about his standing, his influence, and the trust people placed in him. It's really vital to understand. These militia captains were not professional soldiers like in the Continental Army.
Right, not career military men.
No, they weren't trained in formal European tactics. They weren't appointed by George Washington or the Continental Congress. These were men chosen by their own neighbors.
So it's almost like a local democratic kind of military leadership.
In a way, yes. They were the respected figures in the community, the prominent planters, maybe local magistrates, established citizens people looked up to. Samuel's rank as captain is a direct reflection of his high status in St. Stephen's Parish. His neighbors, the people he went to church with, traded with, maybe settled disputes, for they trusted him to lead them into what they knew would be a brutal, dangerous conflict.
That personal connection must have made the stakes just incredibly high. He wasn't leading anonymous troops. He was responsible for his relatives, his tenants, the guys he grew up with.
The accountability was intense and intensely personal. Imagine leading your neighbors into an ambush that goes wrong. You'd have to return to your plantation and face the widows, the children of the men lost under your command.
Wow.
It's that localized, intimate leadership that really fueled the ferocity of the war in South Carolina. When neighbors are leading neighbors against other neighbors, sometimes even family members on the other side, the traditional rules of warfare can just dissolve.
I feel like I have to jump in here, though. This status, wealthy planter, slave owner, pillar of the community, risking it all for liberty. How do we square that circle? Given the sources point to his wealth being built on enslaved labor, what was the motivation for the Low Country elite? Was it purely about protecting their economic system, just dressed up as political freedom?
That's the central, unavoidable contradiction of the revolution in the South, isn't it? And the sources suggest that for the planter class, the motivations were complex, but yes, often deeply rooted in self-governance and economic control.
Okay.
The records indicate the liberty they were fighting for was primarily political liberty, the freedom for white, property-owning men like themselves to run their own affairs, control their own assets, manage their trade without a distant king or parliament telling them what to do.
So they saw British policies as threatening their rights as Englishmen, especially property rights.
Exactly. And for them, property explicitly included their enslaved people. So while they used the language of liberty against British tyranny, it was a specific kind of liberty they envisioned, one that unfortunately coexisted with chattel slavery. Their fight was largely about who held power over their economic lives.
So their commitment was so strong because the alternative, staying under British rule where potentially London might eventually interfere with slavery or their trade, was simply unthinkable for them.
That seems to be a major factor. The stakes were fundamentally about power. Who gets to rule us? Who gets to tax us? By choosing rebellion, Samuel wasn't just risking his life in battle. He was asserting the principle that local authority, their authority, mattered more than the king's decree. He was protecting the whole structure of wealth his family had built over 3 generations.
It's a complex picture, and that political choice quickly turns into a physical nightmare. Let's jump ahead to 1780. The war in the South, the Southern Campaign, it becomes known for just being incredibly brutal, especially after the British captured Charlestown.
Utterly devastating. The fall of Charlestown in May 1780 was a catastrophe for the Patriot cause in the South. It basically wiped out the main Continental Army there.
Yeah.
Captured, scattered, gone.
So, from the British perspective, the war in the South looked pretty much over at that point.
It did. Organized, formal resistance seemed to have collapsed entirely. It looked like they'd secured the southern colonies.
So, what kept the fight going? How did it shift from, formal battles to this desperate, drawn-out struggle?
It really came down to these Patriot militia brigades, led by men just like Samuel DuBose, who simply refused to give up. They knew they couldn't win a stand-up fight against British regulars, so what did they do?
They changed the rules.
They adopted relentless guerrilla warfare. The fighting moved away from open fields and plunged into the toughest terrain you can imagine, the swamps, the rivers, the dense forests that these local guys knew like the back of their hand.
Their home turf.
Exactly. The war became incredibly fierce, deeply personal, and just plain brutal. It was often fought, quite literally, in the DuBose family's backyard in those Santee River swamps.
And this is where Captain DuBose comes under the command of arguably the most famous guerrilla fighter of the whole revolution, General Francis Marion, the Swamp Fox.
That's right. The historical records confirm Captain Samuel DuBose served as one of Marion's men. Francis Marion was, well, he was a military genius born out of necessity. He knew his small, often poorly equipped force couldn't go toe-to-toe with the British army, which was arguably the best in the world then, so he didn't try. He completely redefined the battlefield. He decided he wasn't going to seek big victories. He was going to seek constant, demoralizing disruption.
Which is how he got the nickname, the Swamp Fox.
Precisely. He became like a phantom to the British. Marion's brigade operated from the deepest, most tangled parts of the Santee and Petee River swamps. And we're not just talking about woods here. This is a maze of blackwater rivers, hidden islands choked with vegetation, cypress swamps.
Impossible terrain for a conventional army.
Absolutely. A logistical nightmare for the British regulars. But for local men like DuBose, it was home. They knew every creek, every hidden path.
So they waged this campaign of ambushes, quick raids. What was the actual point of these small-scale fights? They weren't capturing cities.
No, the goals were purely tactical, aimed at disruption and hitting British morale. They'd ambush supply convoys, grabbing essential food, ammunition, horses, things the British desperately needed deep in hostile territory.
Oh, yeah.
They'd harass loyalist militia units, keeping them off balance, preventing them from effectively organizing and supporting the British. And maybe most importantly, they just maintained this constant nagging threat. They reminded the British occupying forces that they were never, ever truly safe, not even in their own camps.
It sounds like an absolutely miserable and terrifying way to live and fight. We should probably spend a moment on what daily life was actually like under Marion. It must have been the total opposite of that comfortable plantation life Samuel knew.
Oh, it was a life of just unrelenting hardship, constant danger and deprivation. Try to picture the rhythm of it. These sudden, incredibly fast night raids on a British or Loyalist camp. You inflict some damage, maybe grab some desperately needed supplies like gunpowder or food.
And then you vanish.
Instantly. You have to melt back into the swamp immediately. That might mean paddling silently down dark creeks, wading through waist-deep water, just disappearing before the professional British troops, who operated on slow, formal commands, could even organize a proper response.
The British Army was built for formations, for open fields. The swamp must have just driven them crazy, militarily and psychologically.
It was the ultimate psychological weapon against them. Think about it.
Yeah.
British soldiers in heavy wool uniforms carrying standard-issue muskets and gear, trying to move through that terrain, they hated it. The heat, the mud, the insects, the diseases, like malaria. They couldn't effectively pursue Marion's men, who were lightly equipped and could move fast. The militia, though, used their intimate, almost inherited knowledge of the land. Every hidden trail, every bit of high ground, every secret crossing, that knowledge was their defense.
That terrain knowledge wasn't just an advantage. It sounds like it was fundamental to survival.
It absolutely determined who lived and died out there. And on top of the danger, their living conditions were just awful. They were chronically poorly equipped, no standard uniforms, no regular pay, certainly no reliable food supply.
How did they even eat?
They lived off the land, hunting, fishing, foraging, whatever they could scavenge. They also relied heavily on a network of Patriot sympathizers in the area. Ordinary farmers who risked everything to hide them or give them food, but that was always dangerous. They were often wet, frequently hungry, constantly exposed to sickness in that hot, humid climate.
To give up the comfort of that planter life, the wealth from rice and indigo, a dry bed, security, to choose that existence in the swamp. It really speaks volumes about how deeply Samuel must have believed in the cause.
It shows his commitment went way beyond just political preference. It became an act of profound personal sacrifice. And the thing about Marion's men, their success wasn't measured in capturing forts or winning big battles. It was measured in endurance.
Just keeping going.
Just keeping the Patriot resistance alive when, by all rights, it should have been completely crushed after Charlestown fell. Their victory was in not being caught, in continuing to harass the enemy, forcing the British to waste huge numbers of troops trying to pin them down, troops that could have been used elsewhere.
Which means their impact wasn't just local to South Carolina, they actually helped the wider war effort.
Significantly, that constant pressure, that drain on British resources and morale in the Carolinas, it absolutely helped set the stage for later, more decisive Patriot victories that eventually led to Yorktown and the end of the war. This guerrilla campaign wore the British down, physically and mentally, until they just couldn't sustain the occupation effectively.
So, after years of this incredibly intense personal kind of fighting, the war finally ends. The Americans achieve independence. What happens to Captain Samuel DuBose? He steps out of the swamp, finally done fighting. What does he return home to?
Well, he returns to his plantation in St. Stephen's Parish, yes. But he returns to, frankly, devastation. The immediate aftermath of the revolution in South Carolina was incredibly harsh. The state had been a major battleground for years.
Right.
Plantations were damaged or destroyed, crops ruined, livestock stolen or killed by both sides, infrastructure like bridges and mills often wrecked. His first job wasn't putting his feet up. It was facing the long, hard grind of rebuilding his lands, his home, restoring some kind of economic stability.
So he didn't just walk back into the prosperity left behind, he came back to a shattered economy that would take years to fix.
That's exactly right. And this is the crucial difference he returned with a completely new status. He wasn't just Samuel DuBose, planter, trying to fix his fields. He came home as Captain Samuel DuBose, a veteran, a founder of the new nation.
That's immense social and political capital in the brand new United States.
It utterly transformed his standing. He went from being a colonial gentleman, technically a subject of the king, to being a respected citizen of a sovereign republic, a republic he had personally fought to create through considerable courage and sacrifice. That foundation of patriotic service gave him, and by extension his family, a kind of political and social currency in the new American society that went far beyond just owning land.
So, in a way, the inheritance he passed on wasn't just material anymore, it was something else entirely.
Precisely. That's the key legacy shift. He left an inheritance, yes, of eventually recovered land and rebuilt property, and that was obviously important for the family's future wealth. But he also passed down this powerful inheritance of honor, of proven patriotic service, of validation.
That story, the story of Captain DuBose riding with Marion, must have become central to the family's identity.
Absolutely. It became foundational for generations to come. It cemented their identity as Americans, authenticated by the crucible of the Revolution.
And we see that legacy reflected pretty quickly, right, in the life of his son.
We do. His son, also named Samuel DuBose, Samuel Jr., he inherited this mantle of honor. He was born into an America his father had literally bled to help establish. That foundation of service helped position the younger Samuel for success within the new structures of American government and society.
And the captain himself.
Captain Samuel DuBose Sr. lived on for some years after the war, successfully rebuilding much of his life. He eventually died and is buried in the old DuBose family cemetery. He's really seen today as the patriarch, the starting point of this new, definitively American generation of the family.
Looking back at the whole arc then, from Isaac the refugee arriving with nothing to Captain Samuel the revolutionary planter, it feels like such a deliberate, profound transformation of identity. It really is the ultimate pivot point for the family.
It really is. It's that moment where the family narrative stops being primarily about escaping European persecution or just succeeding as colonists within the British Empire, and it becomes fundamentally about American identity, about nation building. His service, and the service of countless others like him in the militias, is what took a sometimes messy, sometimes contradictory colonial rebellion and forged it into a new nation. That act of commitment locked the DuBose family's story, their future prosperity, their very identity, forever into the story of the United States.
What an incredible, almost unbelievable legacy to leave behind, forged right there in the swamps and fields of revolutionary South Carolina. Well, that wraps up our deep dive into Captain Samuel DuBose's life and service. We've traced this family now from Europe, through building colonial wealth, and now right through the fires of the Revolution, seeing them become American in the most fundamental way possible.
It's a fascinating journey, isn't it?
Yeah,
Shows how these deeply personal political choices made by one generation echo down through history and shape the identity of all who follow.
absolutely. Now, next time, we're going to do something a little different. We're taking a massive leap forward in time, skipping right over several centuries, actually, to explore a really interesting modern angle on all of this.
Okay.
We're going to look at how 21st century science is now being used to connect back to this deep history. We'll be diving into how modern DNA testing and genetic science are actually being used to scientifically prove direct lineage all the way back to Isaac DuBose, the original immigrant ancestor.
Wow, so connecting the dots with genetics.
Exactly, helping to solve some of those genealogical puzzles that, old documents and records sometimes just can't quite resolve on their own.
That sounds fascinating. The intersection of deep family history and cutting-edge science.
It really is. So definitely don't miss that. Join us next time for the deep dive.